Yom Ashtiyasar, Tafshin Lamed Aleph, Ois Hey. We explained earlier. First of all, the idea of Geula, and especially the complete Geula, means the complete oneness that a Jew chooses Hashem just because it's Hashem. Because that's where my essence is. That's the Ishur. That is the special praise, so to speak, that there is, that the Jewish people have, is we are praised and we're lucky and we're happy that we get to choose Hashem because it's Hashem. Then the Rebbe asked, but doesn't it make sense in Seichel, which means it's not coming just from me. If it makes sense, then it's not fully a choice that comes from the essence of my soul. So the Rebbe brought the mashal that the Bikeach, the wise person, he chooses the king. He doesn't choose the Duchsin, the Istrichin, the Ifrichin, the Tilutin. He doesn't choose the various ministers. He chooses only the king. The Rebbe says, but why does he choose the king? It's because it makes sense, because he says, because all the rest of them, they don't last. They're not everlasting. The king is everlasting. That's why he chooses the king. So the Rebbe says, but then it's because it makes sense. And so the Rebbe explains that when the nations of the world, there's two options, there's two ways of looking at why the nations of the world, they worship the idols, which means they choose all the other ministers. One reason is because they're making a mistake, because they don't recognize the truth that it's not coming from them, it's only like an axe in the hand of the wood chopper, it's all coming directly from Hashem. The Jew is wise, he realizes the truth that everything's from Hashem, and like one of the things that we do in our lives, when we realize it's not us, it's Hashem. But the Rebbe says that's still not the ultimate wisdom. The ultimate wisdom is something even deeper. That even though, in Chassidus it explains many places, that when a person connects to Klippa, since he's connecting to Klippa, Hashem gave the power that when he receives, it says, Asher neichel Mitzrayim chinam, in Mitzrayim, in Klippa, one gets things without having to work. And since it's not measured and it's not decided based on his actions, he also in the meantime gets more later on. It doesn't last. But the fact is that in the beginning he can get it for free. So the guy, he's looking at only, what am I going to gain from it? He wants for himself, and therefore he'd rather be able to do it for free. He'd rather be able to get an abundant of hashpah without having to work for it, and that's why he worships the idols. Whereas the Jew says, I don't care if I'll get more, all I want to do is serve the king. But the Rebbe continues to ask, and he's saying that what's the real reason why the wise person chooses the king? So seemingly what the Medrash says is because all the rest don't last, they're not everlasting, the king is everlasting. And like it explains in Chassidus, that the hashpah that you can get from the klippa is only for the time being, because it comes a time when the truth of what everything really is becomes revealed, and then you lose the hashpah that you're able to get from the klippa. So that's something that the wise person understands. He's a chacham, he's reyes hanoilad, he knows what's going to happen eventually. He says, yeah, now they're serving, now they're getting more, but that's not going to last. But based on that, then also the bikeach, the wise person, the fact that he's choosing the king, is because of the fact, the difference between him and the others is they're all thinking about the present. He's thinking about what's going to happen eventually. But he's also thinking about his gain, that he's going to gain from the fact that he's serving the king, because since he's serving the king, it's going to last forever. But when the Medrash says, Chelki avay yamro nafshi, I'm choosing Hashem because I want to choose Hashem, that's what the Jews are choosing. That means it's not the real reason. It's not only because of that. More than that, the Jew recognizes and sees that all of the hashpah, whenever you can get something from the klippus, it's like the king is giving things over his shoulder, which means it's not really coming from the pnimiyus achayis. It's not what Hashem wants. A Jew doesn't want that, because that's death. That's something which isn't real. It's death. It's not connected to Kedusha. It's death, and a Jew doesn't want to be connected. Even if I can get more, I don't want to be connected to death. I want to be connected to Hashem and only to Hashem. And that's what we say, Kulu mishchalfin umalka eina mischalef. Kulu mischalfin umalka eina mischalef doesn't mean that he realizes that it's not going to last. But he realizes from the fact that it doesn't last, that even now it's not real. Not real meaning this isn't a real hashpah, this isn't from Kedusha, this isn't coming from Hashem. A Jew, his choice, Asher. What's the Jew's choice? Bachru b'Kadosh Baruch Hu, a Jew chooses Hashem. I want only Hashem, not only because this way I'm going to get and it's going to last. But when I realize that what comes not from Hashem doesn't last, then I realize that that's death and that's not Kedusha, and I want to get only something that comes from Kedusha, even if for now it will be less. And even if it means I'm going to have to work harder for it, that's what I want, because I'm not looking for what I'm going to get. I'm looking to be connected to Hashem. That's what the Rebbe explains when he says, now, the Rebbe asks a question that seemingly, even if we're going to say that the whole point of the Pikeach, the wise person, why does he choose the king? Not because of what he's going to get, but because of the greatness of the king. That's why he's ready to give up everything. Because he wants to have the king, because the king is what's real, but seemingly that still doesn't come from the essence of the soul, from the essential connection. That's still something that makes sense, and actually we call him a pikeach, a wise person. Intellectually, it makes sense that I should want to give up all the hashpah that comes from things which are death, from things which are not everlasting, which shows that they're not true life, but rather I should choose the king, even if it's less, even if what I can get in the meantime is less. But in the Medrash it says, Chelki avai yomra nafshi, my soul chooses Hashem not for any reason. It's supernatural, it's above intellect, it's not an intellectual thing. I'm choosing Hashem because it's Hashem. And so the Rebbe says the point of the idea is like this. Intellectually, when it comes to a person's intellect, a person's intellect wants him to choose what's good for him and what he's going to gain from. The fact that a person's ready to give up what's good for him and his personal gain in order to choose the king, despite the fact that of course it makes sense to choose the king, but it doesn't make sense in the human intellect to choose something, no matter how great it is, which is going to damage what I'm going to receive, my existence. And that's the idea, like we say, that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that something which is above seichel, which is above intellect, is the fact, the connection that the soul just wants to connect to Hashem, even if it means that I'm going to lose my existence. In other words, intellect, in the end of the day, is still human intellect. It's intellect which is connected to my existence. My existence obligates me to want to have more, no matter what. To want to enjoy myself, to want to get and gain more no matter what. The fact that I'm ready to give up on gaining more in order to be connected to the truth, to the essence of Hashem, that's something which is not dependent on intellect. That comes from the essential connection of a Jew to Hashem, that he's ready to give up his existence and to choose godliness. And like the Mashal Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the flame, it wants to connect to its source, it wants, even though it will cease to exist. But intellectually that doesn't make sense. That's a natural thing of our natural connection to Hashem. Now the Rebbe continues to say that this, in fact, makes it be also a pikech. Why are we giving a reason? The kulu mischalf no malka ene mischalef. Mitzat seichel, intellectually, a person wouldn't choose something which is bad for him or which is not going to enhance his existence, because that's what the nature of a human being is. But because the neshama is connected to Hashem, that causes that also intellectually, now I should understand, it affects even the intellect, that the physical intellect should also recognize that in truth, the best thing is the king, because the king lives and lasts forever and ever, and therefore that's something which I should rather choose rather than anything else, because that's the best thing in the world. And the Rebbe continues in Ois Vav, in Ois Zayin, to explain this, that this choice of the neshama affecting the intellect actually brings the neshama to a higher level, and the Rebbe goes on first to explain a very interesting thing. The Alter Rebbe, in the Siddur, in the Ramaschal Avadim Hayinu, so the Alter Rebbe explains the idea of what is para in Mitzrayim, and he explains it with a mashal. He says the following. There's a king that makes a big party. When he makes the big party, everyone gets. Everyone receives from the food of the party. There's the ministers that they're by the king's table, the great ministers, the important servants. But then they're all invited guests to the party. But because there's so much abundance, so even the ones who are the simple servants, who are working behind the mills, they also get from the leftovers of the party, and to the extent that even the dogs, they also get from the bones, which is also an amazing amount because it's a leftovers of such a big party. And the same thing, says the Alter Rebbe, that's the idea of Avadim Ayinu Lefare B'Mitzrayim. That means that those who go against the will of Hashem, they also receive when Kedusha gets from, but they get an abundant, a great amount. But that amount is all given. That's not what the king certainly when he bought all the food for the party, he had no intention to give the simple servants, and certainly not to give the dogs. But they happen to get, but they're not receiving from what the king wanted. The king had in mind those who are invited guests by his table, and the other ones they get by the way, and that's the idea of man, the shadi, basar, kasper, like he gives it behind his back, which means they get by the way, and they get a lot, and they get an abundance, and they get great amounts. Says the Rebbe now, there's two types of people over here. There's two types of groups. There's two groupings. There's those who are not by the king's table and those who are by the king's table. The lowest level of those who aren't by the king's table is the dogs. A person by nature is mayach shalit ala leiv, his brain, his mind rules over his heart. His intellect, his understanding is what controls his desires. A dog, not only does his desires control him, but his kulei leiv, his entire essence is just want. There's nothing there that brings him outside of just leiv, what I want. Then there's the avadim, there's the servants who at the end of the day they're serving the king. But the fact is they're not serving the king because they want to. Their desire, their want is not to serve the king, but they're afraid. They have no choice. They have to serve the king, and that's why they also don't belong on the king's table, because they have no connection to the king. They're serving the king against their will. Then there's the important servants, who they serve the king because they want to serve the king. They have a desire to serve the king. They're still not on the level of son. They're serving the king because of Kabbalah Sale. They're serving the king because they were told to do it, but nevertheless they're doing it. They desire, they want to serve the king. That's like the people who want to accept Hashem's kingship upon them. They're connected to the king. They belong by the king's table. And then there's the ministers, and in the ministers they actually know what's going on in the kingdom. And there's two styles of ministers. There's the simple ministers, many levels of ministers, but in general there's the simple ministers, there's the lower level of ministers, and then there's the greater level of ministers. Now says that, so this is the two types of things. There's those who are outside of the king's table. They're getting, but they're not connected to the king. They're not interested in the king. The dogs, all they want is themselves. The simple servants, all they want is themselves. They're afraid of being beaten. Then there's those who are in the king's table, but in that there's three different levels. There's those who are in the king's table, but they're doing it just because they have to. Kabbalah soil, but they want to. They're interested in doing it, but they're servants. Then there's the ministers who are involved, and they actually understand the greatness of the king until there's the great ministers. And the Rebbe says these are the three levels of ifrichin, istiritilutin, and duchsin. These are three levels in Malachim. These are three levels that there are in angels. That means those who are connected to Hashem, like it says, V'hayu imay, the king came into the city, who was with him by his table, who's connected to him, who are the ones who are connected to the king. There's these three different levels of the malachim that there are that are connected to the king, and the same thing is by a Jew, and as we'll continue to explain this in the next time.